most crucial aspect of writing in terms of being able to endure the many years of isolation and obscurity is the joy in the writing itself. My parents were born in North Vietnam. When the country was divided in 1954, they and about 800,000 other North Vietnamese Catholics who were really afraid of communism fled south. When the South lost in 1975, my parents decided to flee again. They were already in their late 30s. I was 4 years old. 130,000 Vietnamese refugees came to the United States in 1975, and they were put into one of 4 refugee camps, and ours was Fort Indian Town Gap in Pennsylvania. In order to leave one of these refugee camps, Vietnamese refugees had to have American sponsors. The problem for our family of 4 was that there wasn't one single sponsor willing to take all 4 of us. So one sponsor took my parents, one sponsor took my 10-year-old brother, one sponsor took me. My most vivid, earliest memories are of being taken away from my parents.
I remember hearing him talk that he cried whenever he saw my parents. Certainly, my parents said things about that, like they just couldn't really handle it whenever they saw him, and then he would have to leave, and that was really hard on them.
I think my separation from my parents was relatively short. It was only a few months long, whereas for my brother, who was 10 years old, he didn't get to come home for a couple of years. We were eventually reunited, and my earliest memories in Harrisburg were actually pretty pleasant. Any kind of experience can be a good experience as long as your parents are around, and my parents were around. It wasn't ironically until we moved to San Jose for them to become entrepreneurs and to open a Vietnamese grocery store that they started working extremely long hours, and then I didn't see them at all. Work was really difficult and it was dangerous. They were shot in their store. Growing up in that way, I felt that our life as refugees was still being shaped by the ripple effects of the war. What my parents were undergoing was a consequence of having to flee their country and having to start anew. And just witnessing that experience, I think, contributed greatly to my desires to be someone who could tell our stories as Vietnamese people, as refugees, and to advocate for our existence and for the rights of other refugees. When I was young, I wanted to become a writer. I didn't want to become a teacher or a professor. Certainly not a professor. I had no idea what a professor was, what a professor did. The kid of refugee parents, shopkeeping parents, no idea what academia entailed. But then I went to Berkeley. I became not just an English major, but also an ethnic studies major, and read a lot of literature by Chicano authors, Black authors, Asian American authors. And I thought that here could be something where I do what I love with literature and combine it with something else that I love, which is fighting for social justice. And then I started teaching in graduate school and discovered that I was actually good at that too. And so I just sort of fell into becoming a professor. It was a compromise because my parents wanted me to become a medical doctor like my older brother. And in my pragmatic refugee mind, I thought I'm just going to get a job, it'll be my day job as a professor, and then I'll write at night. That was my rock star fantasy. That was my way of trying to keep my parents happy while I also tried to pursue what I wanted to do.
Viet Thanh Nguyen is here. His debut novel, The Sympathizer, won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. It examines the Vietnam War through the eyes of its narrator, a mole for the Viet Cong embedded with the South Vietnamese government. Nguyen has been critical of past literary and film depictions of the war. He has called Hollywood America's unofficial ministry of propaganda.
Viet is what I consider an organic intellectual. His heart is where his writing is, that he is not just art for art's sake kind of writer.
Viet is very, very vocal about what he believes in. He has a very humanistic take on life and on sort of how we should treat other people. I think the other thing that's about him that's actually very interesting to me is how generous he is in terms of taking care of other writers, always promoting them.
Asian American studies came about in the wake of the civil rights movement that are really pioneered by African Americans. So I'm just very grateful for Viet to be so visible, outspoken about how we need to support Black Lives Matter, support the bail fund, using concrete ways to support the movement.
The dominant story that Asian Americans have told themselves and told other Americans is the immigrant story, that, that we've come here as immigrants to better ourselves, but also to better the country. But we also need to think seriously about a more radical story, about decolonization. The fact that we've been subjected to warfare in Asia, or that we have been colonized peoples, and that these histories are connected with what the United States has done domestically and overseas, I think we have a better, fuller understanding of our place as Asian Americans in a fundamentally racist and imperialist country. One thing what gives me hope is looking at my children and thinking that they have an opportunity to do better than me, not talking about financially or in terms of social status, but better than me in terms of their understanding of who they are and their place in this country, their place in this world. The range of progressive causes has broadened as our sense of solidarity and the necessity for intersectional thinking across many different causes and locations has grown. And so I think that my hope is invested in a younger generation and their very different perspective on what needs to change today.